Welcome back to the Rebel's Edge. John Najarian here, and my brother Pete will be joining me, and we will discuss the final trading day of September 2024, which means, yes, we're closing out the third quarter, moving into the fourth. Bang! On the Rebel's Edge. Welcome back, folks. As always, he is Pete Najarian, that one over there on that side. And Pete, a lot of games, I know we're going to talk about sports, but a lot of games when they go from the third quarter to the fourth quarter, whether it's football or basketball, hockey doesn't have four quarters. For those of you who aren't familiar, it has three periods. But it gets interesting when you get into that final quarter, doesn't it, Pete?
Yeah, it's the money time, right? I mean, it's amazing how many games that we've seen over the last, just even this weekend, John, starting on Friday night, going into Saturday, and then Sunday, whether it's college or pro. It's amazing how things can change from the first quarter through into the fourth quarter. And it's the money quarter, John, because that's when it really matters in the fourth. It really does. And what did you do? And did you do the right thing in the first three quarters to hold on to it or to give yourself an opportunity? A lot to be said.
Well, there was at least, I thought, Pete, a majority of people who were saying, take the Packers in Lambeau. And that was not the play. That was not the play.
Although, I will say this. Yeah. They came storming back, man. They almost got there. They really did. They almost got there on a game that they were getting dominated in the first three quarters or whatever. It was pretty amazing.
It should be telling for both teams then, Pete, because the Vikings, we're talking about the Vikings-Packers game in Lambeau Field, folks, over the weekend. The Vikings need to basically, as Pete likes to say, put their foot on the neck and press down. Yeah. They need to make sure that they close it out. Mm-hmm. And the Packers need to not let somebody get out into the lead like that, but now they know they can make comebacks, that they're a good enough football team to do that. So both teams probably learned a lot from that one, but for the Vikings, they still got to celebrate, and for the Packers, not so much.
Not so much. We got a wild day in front of us, John.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's talk about the macro minute, Pete. China's manufacturing fell unexpectedly, its steepest contraction since January. And that's why they're going to be throwing $1 trillion at their economy, folks, because renewed downturns in orders and foreign sales, not good for the Chinese economy. And that's why Xi Jinping has no choice, Pete, but to pump that economy up.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the other side of it, our version of Ping is Powell. Because if Powell speaks, people listen. And that has been very true now for quite some time, but specifically over the last couple of months and the last couple of times that we've heard from the Fed, John, I think people just want to hear what do they really have to say. And so far, they have been threading the needle, so to speak. And we'll see if that continues. They can't put their foot in their mouth, or I think we're going to be a little bit fragile, but so far so good. And this week we got so much data that we're going to be taking in along with Powell that's my macro.
Yep. Well, what about futures then, Pete? I'm going to go with Bitcoin falling almost 4%, back down to 63. Is it even touching maybe 62 handle, Pete? Let me see if I see the latest here. Nope. In fact, what am I looking at here, Pete? Whatever numbers I have for Bitcoin, folks, wipe them out because I can't trust what I'm looking at on my screen.
I see 63,500 is what I see.
Thank you. That's what mine should be saying, Pete. But for some reason, I picked up what I knew was a bad print because it looked like 65 on my screen. My eyes aren't good, but they're not that bad. And I thought we were getting a lot closer to 62, just like you said, Pete, 63. But what's your fantastic future?
I'm going to go with nuclear. You and I have talked about this for a very long time now, big portion of this year, and we've been talking about it more and more. By the way, the first nuclear reactor to reopen in U.S. history is coming around the corner. And 3 Mile Island, for those old enough to remember that, they're going to start that son of a gun up again, John. That's going to take a little while, which is part of the issue here when we're talking about energy and the power sources that we're going to be needing. But that hasn't been running since 2021. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, we've had uranium highs as high as 100. We've been as low as $30 back in 2021. And now we're looking at about $80 or so, somewhere in there, John. So this is an area I think that we really should be focusing on when we're talking about energy. Specifically, we're talking about the huge demands that are coming. I think nuclear is the route that we're gonna have to take, and we are starting to see that flow right in front of us now.
Yep, no doubt, Pete. And I was on with Kudlow, your pal, this weekend from Paris, walking around on the streets out here. And one of the things we did get to talk about was indeed that power, if we have nothing else, that is one sector that I think is bulletproof right now, because the demand for it is just going to be going up, up, up. All right, let's talk for a bit, Pete, about Stellantis. Why? Well, because the car manufacturer, Stellantis, which used to be called Chrysler, Jeep Chrysler, and Plymouth, and all the rest, it's a bunch of different companies stuck together, so they created some crazy name. But we had unusual activity, Pete, just ahead of the time when they gave us financial guidance. The guidance, of course, when you have a weak guide, folks, that's something that causes stocks to react negatively in a hurry. And they did that, but somebody, take a look at this unusual activity, somebody in STLA was buying a lot of puts. And those puts, there you see it on your screen, blew up in a big way. So the fact that somebody knew and acted on it, Pete, is always interesting for you and me. And it's one of the reasons that we trade unusual option activity.
Right. It's why we want to piggyback when we see something like this, and we're trying to figure out, well, what changed? Well, here's what did change, John. They decided to revise their guidance in a massive way. And the turn that they put out there, the deterioration of the global industry that they're in, the declines in shipments and all of the rest have completely changed since the last time they spoke to us. So that's why this stock is hitting 52-week lows today. That's why it's 2 times a full day of trading in just the first couple of hours of the day. You look at this company and you just say, wow, that's about as big a stumble as you can make. And I will say this, John, we always talk about guidance being the most important part of any kind of an earnings, right? But when you revise your guidance, that's even bigger, especially when you go this negative. And I think that's what's really hurting them right now. When you really look down and you look at all the different automakers, and we're going to be talking about a lot of them today, but this is really an impact because this is not as much of an EV firm. This is a much different one when we're talking about autos, but they are finding themselves in a very, very difficult spot, and it doesn't sound very good at all. And it doesn't sound like they see themselves clawing out of this for quite some time.
Well, and I got so excited about Stellantis and that unusual activity that our subscribers hopefully made a lot of money off of, Pete, that I skipped right over the big one, which was FXI. FXI is, of course, the China shares. It's their biggest, most liquid ETF, I believe. Then there's the KWEB, KWEB. There are several others, but those are the 2 big ones. And we had unusual activity like crazy in FXI. We had, and there you see it on the screen, folks. And in KWEB, they were buying calls like crazy. And this is because of what we talked about at the top. Well, China PMI and all the rest have indicated that China's really struggling. So now we have a lot of bets that are paying off big time. Now, did it reverse today? The answer is yes, but it's only down 28 cents. It's a $32 index. Basically, it traded down now 28 cents, just breaking 32. But that's still, Pete, over a 5-day run. If you just back out just a little bit, you see this thing, it was, $28, then it ran to 30, then it went to 31 and 32, and it's still hovering right around that 32 level, Pete.
Yeah, I'll give you one other one, John, that you didn't mention just because we did have unusual option activity in there, and I did participate in it, but Asher. This is value, large value stocks. It's a monster. We don't always look at that one. We seem to see a lot much more in the other ETFs that are out there, although this one does as well, by the way. The options they were buying, John, were the October, the 28 calls, regular expiration, the 28 calls. They went for about 40 cents, 43 cents. Today they hit 160. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of how much this thing is up 5% on the day. So very much like our IWM or something like that, people could say, well, where do you want to get value? Well, this is where you do it there, ASHR. It just shows you the huge gains that they have gotten, John, because of what the government's doing over there in China right now. Something definitely worth keeping an eye on. And to your point, it hasn't really backed off all that much today from where we've started to move last week. So pretty strong move, maybe still in the works. We'll see if that happens. But I always say, just like you do, John, you better be disciplined. If you get a nice gain like that on some trades, you might want to trim a little bit.
You might want to. Yeah, I agree. You might want to. All right. Talk about Nio for a sec, Pete, because this is the third of the unusual activities that we had in here. Nio announced some significant funding. And how do they do that? Well, Nio China, I think you get an idea. The second word I threw out there, China, is where they're getting that. China's throwing nearly $1 trillion at their economy. Nio is one of the stocks that will benefit, but we had, gosh, in the pre-market this morning, Pete, we had Nio up 10%. We had JD up 11%. We had Tal, which is one of their educational plays and so forth. Baba. I mean, it was across the board. They were all just screaming higher. And not surprisingly, when you get unusual activity in one of these, Chinese names, you can really make a score because they really just make that pop and then it's over because the main trading of China shares isn't until the next day again. So we'll keep an eye on this one for several days, I think, Pete.
Yeah, I'd say so. As a matter of fact, that one, John, from a volume perspective, is absolutely off the chain. And to your point, I mean, take a look at this stock today. It's up, about 10 or 12%, I think, on this jump, somewhere above $7, $7.25, something like that. But the funding of capital, the installments are going to start hitting. 70% of it's going to hit in November. The other 30% is going to hit in December, and that's the way they're going to piecemeal this out to Nio. Here's the problem that I have with Nio, John. They don't make money. And I bring this up a lot, but when you've got companies that have been trading in the public environment as long as some of these names have, and they still haven't figured out a way to make money, that becomes a problem for me. Oh, and one other thing. The latest thing that I had read, not too terribly, I think it's within the last few months or maybe even a little further back, but they lose on average $35,000 a car. That seems to be a problem for me, John. I don't know. Would you want to invest in a company that is losing that much per automobile? I don't think so. I think this is one of those names. Sure, you can trade it and you can follow the UOA and you maybe even catch it here or there. But in the overall picture, they've got to show us that they can do something more than what they have so far. And that right there is one of the reasons why I think the EV market has its own little issues, their own problems. I think when we talk about the next stock we're going to talk about, it's a better mix right now, at least with gas and with the EV side of things. This is just EV, and I think that's the problem.
Yeah, certainly it is a significant problem, Pete, for Nio. And now let's maybe round it out with what's going on with General Motors, because we talked about Stellantis, which again was Dodge, Chrysler, Plymouth, Jeep, all that stuff. And then General Motors and Ford, they're not doing any better, Pete. I mean, shares are down hard in GM, down in Ford. Basically, they're saying that demand has been dropping off pretty significantly. Now, could that change in 2 months, 4 months, 6 months? It could, because financing costs are going to be coming down, I believe. And I think Pete does too, because we've already had a 0.5 point cut. We're going to see more cuts next year. But if you're one of those auto manufacturers and you're not seeing the demand right now, what can you do, Pete, other than cut prices?
Right, cut prices. And I think one of the moves that we've seen some of these big auto manufacturers, whether it be Ford or GM, and by the way, Morgan Stanley, Jonas has taken back, he's pulled off a little bit some of the price targets and what his general feel for both Ford and GM. But let's be honest, GM has been on an absolute phenomenal run to the upside. You go back to late November, it was up over 80%. As a matter of fact, the stock got all the way up to $50 a share. And right now, even though it's gotten hit a little bit here and a little bit there, John, it's trading $45 last I looked. So a really nice chart when you look at this one. They've done a lot of things right. I think it's impressive what they've been able to do. And I think it's because of the fact that they've had that mix of gas. That's certainly something that I think is going to be beneficial for them, at least for the next 5 years. And I think a lot of people they jumped on this whole thing about it's all about EVs. Well, it's interesting. It's certainly something that can be talked about, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And I think it'll still take some time. And I think that's what we're seeing play out right in front of us right now, John, is it does take time. By the way, GM has done a great job with the stock share buybacks as well. So between the buybacks, the fact that they still have the gasoline units, that is what they lean on. They've pulled off of some of the EVs to some, in some ways. So I think when we really look at this name, I like it. I think on the pullbacks, it might be something to keep an eye on, John, because especially with the fact that you just brought up at the very end of your commentary with GM, hey, with rates getting cut, that's going to help them sell cars. And I think that's a big factor right now.
Well, and let me give you guys just a quick insight before we move on. If you look over the last year, like Pete said, GM is up 36% year over year. Ford is down 15% year over year. And Stellantis is down 28% year over year. I mean, it's been an ugly year. If you only look at this calendar year, Stellantis is down 41%. Ford is down 13% and GM is up 25%. So whatever GM's selling, Pete, they're selling a lot more of them than Ford and Stellantis. And I must say, a lot of their vehicles, I know you're an F-150 guy, and I've never owned a GM truck, but I think a lot of their other vehicles are very popular, and I don't think Ford and Stellantis have anything that's hyper competitive against them in those.
Right.
All right. Maybe, Pete, let's show people this, before we move on to sports, let's show people this clip about the strike. Because if we can do it, Johnny Farrow, show that clip just for, maybe a minute or whatever. This is a guy talking about the strike, the port strike, basically from Texas all the way to the East Coast and impacts of it. So let's run the tape.
Guys who sell cars can't sell cars because the cars ain't coming in off the ships. They get laid off. Third week, malls start closing down. They can't get the goods from China. They can't sell clothes. They can't do this. Everything in the United States comes on a ship. They go out of business. Construction workers get laid off because the materials aren't coming in. The steel's not coming in. The lumber's not coming in. They lose their job. Everybody's hating the longshoremen now because now they realize how important our jobs are. Now I have the president screaming at me, I'm putting a Taft-Hartley on you. Go ahead. Taft-Hartley means I have to go back to work for 90 days as a cooling off period. Do you think when I go back for 90 days, those men are going to go to work on that pier? It's going to cost the company's money to pay their salaries. Well, they went from 30 moves an hour maybe to 8. They're going to be like this. Who's going to win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. And in today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea what that means. Nobody does.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great clip, John. I love it.
Pete, I would emphasize what that guy was saying too. This is happening right at the same time that they're recovering, hopefully, from this horrible hurricane, Helene. And that is wreaking havoc on homes and obviously people's lives, a lot of lives lost. I don't know if it's topped 100 yet, but I heard it was over 45 going into the weekend. And hopefully they kept that number, as low as possible. But man, The longshoremen, they want to strike if they use Taft-Hartley to make them go to work. You think that's going to be a lot of union voters going for Biden-Harris or now Harris-Waltz? Nope. So this is hurricanes have ended other presidential candidates' runs, and this could be another one of those, Pete. I'll just throw it out there.
It's brutal. I can speak firsthand. I've got a house that no longer looks like the house that it looked like. I can tell you that right now. And I'm only laughing because otherwise I'd be crying. It's been a brutal 4 years. So many different hurricanes, but this one was brutal. I mean, it makes the others look like a joke comparatively. It's really awful. All right, let's go to the fun stuff, John. Let's just hit a couple of sports items. So, in the NFL right now, there are 3 undefeated teams. Now, we're only 4 weeks in. Usually, you're going to start to jog back and forth. It shows you a little something about how well I think that the NFL has figured out ways to be better in parity through free agency being one of those, through the draft and how well they've done with the draft and so forth. I think it's been pretty amazing. And take a look, for instance, at the Minnesota Vikings. There is no way at the beginning of the year when they lose their number 1 pick in the draft, J.J. McCarthy from Michigan, that's their quarterback, they lose him, right? He gets hurt, he's out for the year. Now all of a sudden you got to go to the next man up, right? Well, now you've got a quarterback who's playing, and I didn't think he could or would, but he is playing at an elite level. The guy is throwing touchdowns, not throwing interceptions, which has been his biggest downfall. But Sam Darnold has done an absolutely phenomenal job. It's why the Vikings are undefeated right now. You look at Seattle, they're undefeated, but they've got a game tonight. We'll see what happens there. You've also got Kansas City, surprise, surprise, undefeated. So we're only 4 weeks in, John, and there are 3 undefeateds. And if Seattle goes down tonight, that means there's only 2, right? So it shows you the somewhat of the parity. And one of the other things I just wanted to throw out to you, because I'm so impressed, and you and I talked about this as the draft was getting closer. We got into the draft, and I said, Jaden Daniels is the best quarterback I thought in the NFL draft. Well, he right now, John, has 82% completion. 82% completion. 3 touchdowns. He's got 1 interception. And Washington actually looks like a real and a competitive football team. And it's not just one player, but certainly this quarterback, who, by the way, he can run too, John, 218 yards on the ground, another 4 touchdowns, averaging just under 5 yards a carry. I would say that those are the numbers that you would want out of a quarterback that you took that high. Unfortunately, Caleb has not quite put up those kind of numbers, John. And the rest of these quarterbacks haven't been putting up these kind of numbers. This is an unbelievable run right now with a team that really, they had not really a great defense. They had not a great offense. You get this guy in there. He's not the only one. They've done some stuff in free agency. They did a lot of stuff, some trades and everything else. But how about Washington? I mean, this is really, I think, the most shocking thing that I've seen this year is how well Jaden Daniels is playing. How about you, John? Are you shocked by anything? Who's good? Who's bad? What draft picks are working out so far? Who's not? I mean, I know you have strong opinions on this as well.
Right. And I'll give Caleb a little more time. But again, from what you've seen out of Justin Fields in Pittsburgh, Pete, the kid doesn't look so bad.
No.
It doesn't look like, oh, the one guy is so great versus the other guy. It looks like they're both pretty damn good college quarterbacks. Which one can make the can matriculate into the pros and do a better job in the pros? Well, I can't really rate them based on 4 games alone for Caleb, but I'd say Justin Fields is winning that game right now, Pete, of who's the better quarterback as a pro. I will say I'm really looking forward to the Jets-Vikings game, and I guarantee there's a lot, the GMs and anybody in that Jets organization ain't happy about Darnold coming back and looking like a world beater because this guy, I mean, as you said, Vikings are 4-0 and they start fast. It's not that Darnold's old, but for whatever reason, when he gets into the first half of the game, he just lights it up. And then he cruises, it seems more like it, in the second half, Pete, because the stats I saw, Pete, said something like 59-17 is what the Vikings have done in the first 4 games in the first half. So in other words, you're tripling up on the scores that you put up versus the other team. Most people can't come back from that. And Aaron Rodgers isn't looking like the old Aaron Rodgers. He's not looking bad, but he's not looking like he was in his prime. He could still come back and do that, I suppose, Pete. And maybe this is the game that, is a coming out game for him. But man, he's been dinged up a little bit again. And I like the Vikings' chances there against the Jets.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think that game's getting played somewhere overseas. Is it London maybe or something like that? I'm not sure, but I know it's not in either of their home stadiums. So that adds a little other twist to this whole thing as well. So that ought to be pretty interesting.
It is played in London, Pete. It'll be Sunday, 9:30 a.m. In London.
Oh, boy. That ought to be interesting. All right, let's just jump to a little bit of college football, John. And the reason I wanted to do that is you and I talk about this stuff. Why do we talk about football? Well, John and I both played college football. We both played in the NFL. We both have a passion for it. To this day, we love it. And we like to think of ourselves as GMs, so to speak, as far as like how we want to analyze all this stuff. So with all that being said, John, the TV ratings this year are off the charts. And why is that? Because we have had some unbelievable games. And I'll give you just a good example of 3 over the weekend. Now, one of them was Friday night. Miami, the Hurricanes, undefeated. By the way, they're still undefeated, but they could have been beaten and should have potentially been beaten. There was a Hail Mary pass into the back of the end zone. The kid made the catch, and they signaled for a touchdown. That means that Vatek's going to win the game. Oh, they looked at it. They changed their mind, John, and decided, you know what? The defender actually was able to pull the ball out in time. It wasn't a catch. I don't know that was the right call or not, but at least they analyzed it to a very long period of time, and they got to the end, and they said, this is what it is. Then you had the Gophers. The Gophers are getting swamped by Michigan. Michigan's beating the tar out of them. They come all the way back. They get a score. They go for the onside kick. And the onside kick does still exist, by the way. They go for the onside kick. They kick the thing over there. And all of a sudden, we get the ball on like the Michigan 35, 38 line. And I say we because I'm a Minnesota guy. And all of a sudden they say, whoa, wait a minute, there's a flag on the field. What do you mean there's a flag on the field? Well, Minnesota was offsides. They threw that thing up there, John, maybe 5 or 10 times, and nobody thought anybody was offsides. Was it close? Sure. Really, really close. Do you throw the flag on that for being close? I don't think so. But that was the end of that one. I mean, it absolutely was amazing. And I only bring that up because the Gophers last year, John, were playing Iowa, huge rivalry game, and Iowa was getting a ball that was a punt. The guy who was running to catch it starts pointing like this, didn't go up above his shoulder, was pointing like this at who should block who, brings it back for a touchdown, and they call it back because they say that he signaled for a fair catch. I think, unfortunately, the Gophers kind of got back to what happened the previous year where the Gophers were given the victory when they probably didn't deserve it, and now all of a sudden they go to Michigan and they get stripped from the opportunity when they got that onside kick that got all the way down to the Michigan, maybe 38-yard line, something like that. Who are the so far this year, John, we've had some great games. I mean, that Bama-Georgia game is up there right now, I think, as one of the great games that anybody has ever seen, just because of the twists and turns, all the athletes. Shoot, one of them 17 years old. He's playing college football and looks like the best receiver in the all of NCAA. He's fast. He's amazing. He's got great hands, all of this. So both of those teams just absolutely incredible at Bama. It was unreal. I think the former president was there for this whole thing, and they were going crazy over that and all that. That was interesting. But, John, outside of that, if you have a favorite game, tell me. But I would say this. The sleeper teams continue to be the sleeper teams, and people are sleeping on them. How about BYU? They're still undefeated. Nobody's talking about them. They're in the Big 12. They got a quarterback who runs, throws. He's pretty unbelievable, and they're doing everything that they need to do to win. And I'll give you one other one in the Big 10, Indiana. When's the last time Indiana was 5-0 in football? I think it was like in the 1800s. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. But it has been maybe 50 or 60 years. I mean, that's how long. 5-0. I'm not saying they haven't won 5 games in a season. They've won the first 5 games of this year. So kudos to them. It's a brand new coach. He's got a great quarterback, and they are lighting it up. It's pretty fun. So any sleepers, or what? Did you get caught up in that Georgia-Bama game?
Got caught up in that, Pete, and we'll show you highlights tomorrow of that, folks. But I would say, Pete, I'm going to slip back to Travis Hunter and Colorado because, the kid plays 90 plays a game. He had an interception off of the UCF quarterback. Now, they were going to win anyway because they won it 48-21, so it wasn't like a game-saving interception. But every interception, can turn the momentum pretty significantly. And the quarterback was scrambling to his left. He sees the receiver. He just stops enough so that he can throw it to the receiver. And freaking Travis Hunter comes diving in across it, Pete, and makes the interception. And then runs down to the end zone with the ball and does the Heisman in the end zone. So guess what, Stephen A. Smith? We should get him on the show, Pete. What did Stephen A. say about that? Well, he should be a front runner for the Heisman. What did I say last week?
He's a baller, John. The guy comes through, and let's not forget, he came out of high school as one of the best players in all of high school football, right? Coming into the college, and he looked around. He's a Florida guy. Everybody expects, well, he's going to go to Florida State or somewhere like that. Nope. He went and played for Deion, but not at Colorado. He was at the original stop and followed him to Colorado. And Travis Hunter is special. He's unbelievable, to your point. The only negative at all that I would say about him being a two-way player, John, it's got to wear down your body twice as much as a normal player to some degree, I would think. I mean, so if let's say he's 23 years old, he's really kind of 26 years old because he's playing double time, right? Now, I know they used to always do that back when I was playing even. There were some two-way players. When Dad was playing, a lot of two-way players, but they don't do much of that anymore because it does kind of slow you down a little bit and wear you down. Now, it doesn't show when you're 23, 24, 25. It does start showing when you're maybe 28 to 30. So that would be a consideration, I think, if you were a team drafting him. I think you'd have to sort of think about how much longevity does he have left in his physical body, because he's a physical kid.
Well, Pete, I'll say this too. CBS, which one of their media people rated Deion as the worst coach in the Big 12. He ain't looking like that's a great prediction right now. And Deion's got that chip on his shoulder, and he's always one of those guys that loves to have an enemy, whether it's Bad Moon Rising or whomever it is. Deion likes to have an enemy because it gives him something to focus on. But I will say this about the Big 12 this year, Pete. Let me see. I've got BYU 5-0, Colorado 4-1, Texas Tech 4-1, Iowa State 4-0, Kansas State 4-1, Utah 4-1. That's a murderer's row. I mean, honest to God, I know the SEC is supposed to be where it's all at, but the Big 12 is looking like they are stacked with some really good football teams. And if Colorado, it's a big if, but if Colorado can get itself into, a position in there to compete for the championship, there's a lot of crow that's going to be eaten by CBS about calling Deion the worst coach in the Big 12.
Yeah, I don't think you could ever make that call. I mean, if nothing else, the guy, you could be mad at him for a lot of things, but as far as, the coaching of the players that he's got, and he still struggles with offensive line and some of the big guys, defensive line and some of those, but John, there's a heck of a lot of talent on that team, and he knows how to get the best out of those guys, so I would never call him the worst coach about anything. I mean, that guy, and just what he brings to the table energy-wise to the players. I think that they dig that, and who wouldn't? I mean, he's Deion Sanders, for crying out loud. This guy was one of the greatest players ever to play in the NFL, in my opinion.
Yep, and maybe even best athletes of all time. I mean, he's got to be right up there with Thorpe, Pete, and some of the people who have been great track stars, great football players, wrestlers, things like that. I mean, because there's some people like that too, like Bronco Nagurski. I think he was also undefeated at wrestling and football, Pete.
The GOAT, though, John. The GOAT, in my mind, Bo Jackson, nobody's close. Ran track, played baseball, played football, and he was the best at all of those. And I'm reading a present book that he actually wrote about me in the thing, actually, which is nice. But I've been reading that book, and he came from some interesting stuff in his long-term lifestyle or whatever that he changed and became a much better person. But he is the GOAT in my mind. He's the Michael Jordan. He's the GOAT.
Well, folks, we appreciate all of you joining us. We will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So tell your friends, tune in and so forth. And if you'd like to subscribe to any of the services that we've talked about on the show today, like the trades that were going on in FXI or Stellantis or Nio, any of those trades that gave you a nice heads up days or weeks before that big move happened, come on over to marketrebellion.com/get started, and you can see all about it. Well, we'll be back tomorrow at 1. See you then.